Hello and welcome to part 5 of building the DJH G5 kit, and today we're going to do two things. I'm going to talk to you briefly about how to fit or make preparations to fit the DCC decoder, and from that we are going to move on to page 5 of the instructions, which is basically the running plate and a few attachments, and there are some options to consider. So just before we start with the DCC, the footplate is a white metal casting, and what I've done is I have actually cleaned this up to a certain extent. There are some witness marks and flash that need to be removed from this, but what I've done is I've left this one, this one, this one and this one, which are the casting strengthening bars. I've left them in place for the moment because this is quite delicate and it is easy to bend, so anything that can provide you extra strength to the last minute is not to be dismissed. So I'll put that to the side for the moment, and then what we will do now is we'll talk briefly about fitting the DCC chip, which we need to consider. Not now, but now is as good a time as any to do it. So as I mentioned in the introduction, I've got an MX645R decoder with a Lerv speaker, which will fit nicely in the smoke box of the locomotive, and the MX645 comes with an 8-pin plug. So what we need to do is we need to have some means of transition between the 8-pin plug and the electrics in the chassis, so the motor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I do it. Now, I buy 8-pin DIL sockets in tubes from Rapid Electronics, and they come, you get 40 in a packet, 40 in a tube. You can buy them individually if you look around, but I always use the turned pin ones. So if I can, so you've got, oh, dropped it. I've got another one. So I use the 40 pin, the turned pin ones wherever I can. There you go, you can see it quite well. Now, quite usefully, these are done in inches. This is 0.3 of an inch, the spacing between the two sets of contacts, and the spacing on the 8-pin plug is actually 0.1 of an inch, so that's very useful. So what you can do is you can cut the strengthening webs out of the middle of the socket, and that's what we'll do, and then solder them to a tiny piece of Veriboard. This one is 5x4. I keep sort of odds and ends of Veriboard lying around from the electronics projects that I do just for this particular purpose. So I've started the soldering iron up. I'll move the position of the camera so you can actually see what I'm doing, although it is quite small, so we'll have to see how that turns out. But if you just bear with me, I'll just move the position of the camera so you can so that I can show you what I'm doing. The other thing that you will need, apart from the wire, and I'm going to use the silicone wire that I used to do the locomotive, is you need some heat shrink sleeving, and I bought these from, believe it or not, Lidl for £4.99. I bought 2 of these. There's a lot in here, and there is the size that we need, luckily. So I'll just go away, reposition the camera, and then you can see what we're doing. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our 8-pin DIL socket and we are going to remove the webs in between the pins. So with a very, very sharp cutting blade, we'll remove the pins, the webs between the pins, and you should end up with 2 lots of 4 pin by themselves. So we can give them a little bit of a clean up. And we've got our bit of Veriboard here. Now the easiest thing to do, and you need to make sure that you've got these the right way around, is to actually put the pins into the Veriboard back to back, so the outside of the sets of the pins is smooth. So if you turn them round and put them in back to back, like that, they will fit together nicely and they won't be at such an angle. So I've got the electrical solder here. This is low melt electrical solder. It's meant for SMD mountings, but it's fine for general electrical work. So I've got to wait for the soldering iron to warm up again because it timed out. It's very useful, this low melt electrical solder, because when you're soldering surface mount LEDs, you can't surface them, solder them, for example, at full temperature. You can't solder them at 445 degrees centigrade because you'll burn them out quite quickly. I usually solder them at 280 degrees, which is easy to do with an adjustable soldering iron. I'll just clean my bit, make sure that my bit is clean. That's what the hissing is. So now we'll go away. We'll do one end of each one. So that's one. Yeah, we'll come back to that in a minute. And we'll just check. So I've soldered one end of each one. Made a little bit of a mess of it, but it's not too bad. And then on the top you have got the socket with the required spacing for your 8-pin DCC thing. So what we'll do now, we've looked along the side, both parts are perpendicular, so we'll solder all the bits. Don't worry too much about the pins being so close together. Obviously if you've got lights you can solder all the pins. I haven't got lights, so I'm not going to bother with the middle 4. It only needs the bottom and the top pair soldering. So there is the top and the bottom pair soldering. So now the next thing you want to do, obviously, you've got to create your gap. So somewhere around here, if Boris isn't sitting on it, is my Dremel with the cutting disc in. Here it is, just an ordinary, this is a diamond cutting disc, which is a bit thinner than a normal normal one, and then what we're going to do, without, very carefully, between the two pins, so I've done that very gently. I haven't cut all the way through the Vera board, I just cut through the solder and the copper track and a little bit into the substrate, but you can probably just about see it. I'm trying to find the autofocus, there it is. There. So that's that. And the next thing to do is to do the wiring. So I'm going to use this wire again, which I use for the inside, and we will just look at the manual rather than get the book out so that we get the right ones. And as I mentioned at the start, there isn't grey or orange in this. So what we will do for that instead is we will use brown and white. And I have some cable markers that I can use for giving them the correct colours. So it's brown for orange and white for grey. Right, so I've tinned the ends of the wires, and what we're going to do now is we're going to solder the board up, which I've also reduced in size slightly. So I've got the pin out, and remember that when you're soldering from the rear, you are soldering in effect upside down. So we'll just trim this off a little bit more. And the first one we will do is the top right when it is upside down, which is actually the top left. So we'll tin the strip board, and we'll solder the brown / orange wire to that pin. We won't take the soldering off too quickly. So that is our orange wire, which is the wire to the motor, and then opposite that is the red wire, which is the track. So we'll trim that off. Tin the track. Solder that up. The next one is the grey wire, which is white. And then the last wire is the black wire, which goes on the other side. So let's get the autofocus. There we go. Then we have the wire soldered and your 8-pin socket on the other side. We'll just give it a quick check with the meter just to make sure that there is no bits that you've bridged accidentally. So well, the brown and the red are isolated, or the orange and the red are isolated, and the black and the grey are isolated. I'll just check that it, yeah, okay. So the next thing you want to do is you want to isolate this. So you want to, well, not isolate it, you want to insulate it, I should say. So, and that's where our heat shrink sleeving comes in. So we go to the heat shrink sleeving, and what we'll do is we will find some heat shrink sleeving in the box. Right, so I've got this size, so we'll try that one first. And what you want it to do is you want it to go over the socket, and that doesn't, so we'll have to do the next size up. So this is the larger one. And there you go, it goes over the socket. So we'll cut a piece of this. You don't want a great big piece. You want a piece about, I don't know, 15-20 millimeters long. So you want a piece about that long. Roughly centre the PCB under the middle of your bit. So it's roughly centred. And now what we'll do is we will get it to shrink. Now there are various methods of doing this. A normal hairdryer isn't really powerful enough to do it, but if you've got an electric paint stripper, that will do it. I use soldering iron, but don't use the bit end of the soldering iron because the plastic contaminates it. So try not to burn the wires while you're at it. And don't do it so tightly that the pins come through the bottom. So you've got the bottom of it. Don't do it so much that it comes through the bottom. So there it is. And then all you need to do once you've done that is cut round the socket. So using your sharp blade from earlier. So we've exposed the pins now, and we'll just finish it off by making the, so we've made the heat shrink sleeving a little bit tighter, and that's ready to go in the locomotive now. So ready to go in the locomotive. Sorry if I'm shaking everything around. The camera has autofocus with tracking, and if I don't have the item in the green box on the screen, it tends to go out of focus, and then I have to hunt around for it. So that's why there's all this moving around. So anyway, as I said, that's ready now to go into the locomotive. You've got a socket for your 8-pin decoder. You can add more wires if you want lighting, of course, but this one isn't going to have any lighting. So I'll just put it in the box with the chassis up there, and then we'll move on. As I mentioned at the start, now that we've got the little bit of DCC over, we're going to do page 5, which is the start of the body. So starting logically with this, you want to do the splashes. So the splashes are white metal castings, and this one I've cleaned up to some extent, and this one is not cleaned up. This one is as it is out the packet. You will find that these castings do have a little bit of flash on them, and you will need to clean them up. And probably the best way to do that is to use a combination of a sharp knife just to go for the larger bits. Always cut away from yourself, of course, otherwise you will end up cutting yourself, which with something this sharp is not a very good idea. Well, anyway, you get the idea. So the first thing that you need to do is clean up the castings for the splashes. So I'll just go away and I'll just finish this one off quickly. Use a combination of knife, needle file, and nail files. They're very good. You can get a very nice finish with a nail file. because all the nail file is in reality is just very fine graded emery paper, so you can use them just as easily, and they're much more readily available. You don't have to go to a specialist supplier for them. Just beware that there is a little bit of a dip in some of the castings. You can see the dull area. That means it's not completely filled in. There's a slight dip, but it should buff out if you go about it properly and carefully. So we'll just do this one, carry on doing it, and I'll come back and we'll take it from there. There are a lot of holes to drill in this section and some decisions to be made, and we'll run through those as and when we come to them in the instructions. Right, so what I've done is I've cleaned up the splasher castings as best as I can, and in preparation of fitting them, I've drilled some holes in the underside for the fixings. Now, drilling these holes, the first holes, isn't all that critical because the holes need to be drilled 1.8 millimeters. I'm just going to check that my drill is 1.8. Yes, it is 1.8. Right, so you need to drill the holes in the bottom of the splashers 1.8. I've checked that I've got a 1.8 millimeter drill. I'll just use it in my Dremel very slowly on the slowest possible speed. If it's difficult to drill white metal, a good tip is just to dab the end of the drill in oil, some kind of oil, and that will help drilling into white metal. So there's one splasher. It's got a 1.8 millimeter hole in the bottom, and now what we're going to do is we're going to take the foot plate, and referring to the instructions, we're going to start drilling holes. Now, the holes in the foot plate need to be various sizes, but to fit the white metal parts they need to be 2.4 millimeters. So we are going to try and find a 2.4 millimeter drill. It's 2.2. On 3. No, that's too small. Yeah, I bought my drills from Amazon, and they come in packets, and you're supposed to guess, basically. What's this one? 2.6. I'll get there in the end. There aren't that many left to choose from. That one and that one. That will probably be this one. Let's have a look at this one. .4. This one. So when you drill these holes out, be very careful. Make sure you are drilling the correct holes out, the correct size, and as I mentioned, leave the cross pieces in place because it adds to the strength. So just do that one, that one. So yes, you can see that the drill will get stuck. And there you go, you can see all the holes. It does say in the instructions in a box at the top up here, does say drill all holes 2.4 millimeters, and it also shows on the plan that you drill all holes 2.4 millimeters. So we have got our splashers, and if you can see on the splasher there is a cast rivet detail. What you want to make sure is that your splashers are level within that and there is no daylight, and it's not too bad for that one. We'll just move a bit off the splasher because it's sitting up slightly. So the curved bit, I've just done it out with a sharp blade, and that's much better. Just a little bit more off this end. That fits nicely. All you need to do is just do that with the other one. And that needs a bit off this end of the curved bit. You can use a circular needle file to do this if you want as well. That looks okay. That doesn't look too bad. Just give it a quick rub on that. So you've done your two splashes. Your two splashes fit into this, and there are a couple more holes that you will need to drill, and we'll do those now as well, just so we don't have to worry about them. These holes are 1.3 millimeters. So just let me put these drills away. Find a 1.1 millimeter drill now, and I think this is 1.1. 1.1. So the 1.1mm drill is for the lamp irons, and I'll just drill those. There are some other holes to drill a bit later if you are doing the push-pull fitted version, but if you remember, my one 67342 wasn't push-pull fitted, so I don't need to bother about those. So there are 3 at the front and 3 at the back, and there are witness marks in the cast chassis, so just drill them to a reasonable depth at both ends. And then you have 3 holes for your lamp irons. So we'll just make sure all the drills go away, otherwise we'll never find them again. They go in that bracket. That one goes in there. Another major choice that you need to do at this stage is the which buffers you want. So if you can cast your memory back to the first edition, you get 2 buffer beams for each end, and the buffer beams have the buffers cast into them. So this is the buffer beam with the group standard buffers in, and we don't want those. We want the ones with the Wurzel buffers, because we have looked at our locomotive and not all locomotives had the group standard buffers at the period that we're modelling. In fact, not all of them had group standard buffers when they were withdrawn. So we'll just get the other buffer beam. Of the correct type. So we have 2 buffer beams with Wurzel buffer shanks. Ooh, try not to drop them. And these actually need, well, they need fixing on the footplate somehow. So in the instructions it suggests gluing, and we are not going to glue them, we're going to solder them. So again, they need a bit of cleaning up, much the same as all the other bits, using your multiple cleaning methods. The buffer beams were steel wood sandwiches. So just clean them up roughly. You don't need to do them perfectly because you can do cleaning afterwards. So that one's done, and the other one to help you fit them. The buffers actually go slightly above the surface of the footplate, and what we're going to do is there is a small hole in the middle. There are bigger holes for the buffers because when you fit the buffer heads, you're going to have to either fit the buffers all the way through both thicknesses, and that is quite a thickness of metal. If you can see, that's quite a thickness of metal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill holes in the buffer beams so that the nuts for the buffers only act on this bit. So there'll be quite large holes, but the Wurzel buffers are use only 12 BA fixings, whereas the group standard ones are a lot bigger. So I'm going to do that, and I'll fix the buffer beam in place by drilling a hole through and using a nut and a bolt to actually hold it while I solder it. That way I can line it up and make sure that it's parallel, it's flat. I'll just go away, I'll just set that up, and then I'll come up and show you what I've done. So to prepare the buffer beam, I have drilled 1.1mm holes through the buffer beam and through the casting in the end, 3 of them. And what I've started with this one is using a pin vise and a 2.6mm drill as per the instructions for the Wurzel buffers here. I've started making a hole down into the buffer shanks. It is not advisable to do this from the go using your Dremel, because if you get it off center you will ruin the buffer shank. The drill will break through the side of the buffer shank, and then the casting will be ruined. So we're going to use the pin vise, and we'll just start the hole off. Use a bit of oil, as I mentioned earlier, to make it a bit easier. There's your 2.6mm hole, and we'll do the other one on the other side, and then we'll just check that we've got the depth correct, because it says that these holes need to be 7mm deep. So I'm going to use a bit of masking tape. Probably be easier to cut it. There we go. So the masking tape marks the 7mm bit on the end, and we'll just make these holes a little bit deeper. Right, so now the holes have got a good start, then we can use the Dremel on the slow speed. Again, remember, you don't want to do it too fast. We'll put a drop of oil in each hole again. Yeah, that's not good. So we've got a drill that's a bit sharper. No. So I've eventually done one, but you will certainly have to be very careful when you do this. Because white metal catches. So there's one done. There's one done. You will need to obviously clean off the back of the buffer beam. What we'll do, looking at it, I think that we will drill the buffer beam 1.6 millimeters as the instructions say, and we'll put the nut on this side of the chassis rather than have the nut on the rear of the buffer beam. So I'll just complete this one. We want a 1.6 millimeter drill. We're just going to drill the buffer beam. I'm not going to drill through the footplate yet because we need the holes to line up. So I've drilled through the buffer beam 1.6 millimeters, and what we'll do in a minute when we've done the other one is we will attach the buffer beams to the footplate and solder them in place. And then drill the 1.6 millimeter hole through both pieces once they're fixed to each other. Right, what I've done is I've drilled out both of the buffer beams for my chosen buffers, and what I've done at this end is I have used a steel 12BA nut and bolt to actually hold the buffer beam in place. And what you can do if you do this, because the buffer beam will pivot around it, you can get the level correct, make sure it's flush at the top. It is slightly shorter, the buffer beam, than the sides, and we'll just check that that is correct in the book. So we've got our book, and well, looking at these ones, yes, it was. So the buffer beam should be slightly shorter than the locomotive buffer beam. Sorry, the footplate buffer beam, it should be slightly shorter. So now what we're going to do is we will solder that in place. We'll just fire the iron up again because it's timed out, and we'll set it to 315 degrees because we're soldering white metal to white metal. And get our flux ready. And we will solder it underneath. I think it's probably the best idea. So a little bit of flux along the join, just tilt it so that the flux goes up between. Make sure it's parallel. .70° solder, and we will be very careful with this. We'll just put a little bit on the ends because there's a little bit of a gap. And we'll run across the top as well. there is the first buffer beam soldered on, and we can remove the bolt and nut and use it again for the back one. So we'll just unscrew it. Lost the nut. Never mind, we got another one, because I knew that would happen. So again, put the screw through to hold the buffer beam in place, and then you can adjust it by hand so that it lines up. You want to get it flat at the rear and equidistant on the rear of the footplate. It doesn't matter if it sticks up a little bit at the bottom, but if you remember, the buffer beam on the prototypes were shorter than the footplate because they were just bolted on. Originally these locomotives only had steel buffer beams, but they were fitted with a wooden steel sandwich. So we'll just flux around again. Sort of tack solder it in place. Of course, if you're not confident enough to solder it, you can glue it, and to be perfectly honest with this, I would use 2-part epoxy. Probably would be the best choice for this, not super glue. And you could actually fit the buffers and use the buffers to hold the 2 parts together. Or you could use a screw through the buffer beam where the buffer holes are, a larger one. You will need a larger one for the where the buffers go. And that is it. It's done all the way around, and all you need to do now is clean it up a little bit, and for that I just use one of Christina's nail files again. You don't have to worry too much about the ends, because if you look at enough pictures of G5s, the wooden steel sandwich ends were all over the place. In a lot of cases they didn't line up at all. So it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. It just needs to be level along here. Underneath, again, it doesn't matter so much, but the top of the footplate needs to be as level as you can reasonably get it. And what we'll do is we'll clean it off. Might better use a knife for that bit. Oh, sorry, we have two greyhounds and the other one's decided to come up to see what's going on. But she won't get on the bed. Right, just bear with me while I get a knife. Right, so I've soldered both the buffer beams using white metal soldering, and what I've done is I've tried to leave a little bit of a witness mark on the top to show that the buffer beams were separate from the rest of the footplate. So there you have your footplate, and now we're going to do a little bit of detailing on the footplate. But before we start, before we go any further, if you just excuse me, I'm just going to get something out of my toolkit which you will need when you do the footplate, and that is a 12-inch ruler, because that is going to be your best way to tell that the footplate is not bent. So just hold the edge along and just check that it's not bowed at all, that you haven't sat on it, you haven't put it down and put your hand on it. You can also look down it by eye and do small adjustments to keep it flat, and that will help you. That will help you. Right, so now we have done the buffers, and all we've got to do left to do now, there's just various detailing parts to put on, which are actual brass castings. And we'll just refer to our picture again. If you remember when I showed you back in the day, this is my locomotive, but when it was based at Moulton Shed, which is slightly after the period that we're looking for. And if you look at the front buffer beam, the front buffers, it had a group standard draw hook, and if you notice, the buffers have got wooden pieces between them and the buffer beam. I can't model that because they come as they are, so we're going to have to ignore that. What we're interested in is the disposition of the pipes on the front, and it follows the disposition on the drawing when it refers to Westinghouse fitted locomotives. In fact, the locomotives that retained the Westinghouse pumps for air brakes on the locomotive did have an air brake connection, and they're not as in the kit. They were below the buffer beam, and they're quite difficult to see on dark photographs like this. So we won't worry about that either, because you only know about it because I told you. So we're not going to worry about that too much. And what we are going to do next is we're going to fit the splashers, and we are going to fit the brass detailing parts that we need to fit. So to do the splashers first, the splashers you cleaned up earlier, and what you need to do the splashers is you need from the hardware kit, you need self-tapping screws. Now we need to make sure that we get the correct ones, and the ones for the splashers are 108039, and we'll just check what they look like. Go back to the start in the parts bit. One 108039. They are these ones, which are the pan head ones. So we need 2 of those. So we'll be very careful. We'll just make a small slit in the packet so we don't lose them everywhere. And a bit later I'll go and look and see if I've got any zip top bags. I know I have. And I'll just drop one. I'll pick that up in a minute. Make sure they go in the box. They fit through. And get a screwdriver set. And we will get the correct one. PZ1 I think would probably be best. Let's have a look. So posi drive 1. And that is all it is to the splashers. But because it's me, and because we want to make sure the splashers stay in place, we're going to put a little bit of solder on them at the rear because they're only fixed at the front. So we'll solder on the inside at the back. White metal solder again. And we've soldered around the inside at the rear just to keep them in place, because the screws are at the front and there's a chance that they'll twist around the screws. So we'll just give those a little bit of a tweak, and we will just clean up the inside. And we've given it a little bit of clean up inside. We've kept the strengthening bar in, but now, in theory, we could remove it if we want. And just before we go any further, we will just check. This is the boiler, and the saddle here has to fit between these two bits, and we'll just check that they fit, and it does fit. You can see that it fits. It's a little bit of movement, but there is an etched part which covers up that gap, so we don't have to worry about that too much at the moment, just as long as this fits between the two spatchers. And all we have to do now is just fit our white metal bits. Sorry, not our white metal bits. What am I talking about? Our cast brass bits. So we will fit the lamp irons, and we will fit the pipes. There are instructions telling you what size to drill the holes out. That's 1.6 that I drilled earlier for the buffer shanks. And what we'll do is we'll find the drill set and carry on. Right, so here's the drill set. I'll put the 1.6mm drill back because we don't need that. What we need is 1.5 and we need 1.1 again. So I've got a 1.1mm drill somewhere which I left out. This is 1.5. 1.5 is for the steam pipe connection. at both ends. Steam pipe connection is that hole that sits down. Right, so that's done. Now we need to find a 1.1mm drill, which I thought I'd left out, but I haven't. One more 1.1mm drill, and we'll just get the brass bits that we need. We need a couple more white metal bits as well. We need these steps. So right, so here we go. These are the brass bits that we need. We'll just take one out because they're both the same. We only need one lot, and we're not building a push-pull fitted one, so we don't need the bits at the bottom. And we need the steam pipes and the lamp irons. So we need that lot. And we need the other steps. And then the other steps. Right, we'll do the steps last. We'll do the steam pipes first. So there's your steam pipe. There's the steam pipe. Just going to polish the shank slightly. And you're soldering brass to white metal, although you can do it at 315 degrees. You don't need to worry about the temperature too much for small parts like this. I'll just get the white metal solder from the shelf. So there's the white metal solder, there's your part, and we're going to tin this with a bit of white metal solder. As you would do normally. So flux. Flux around the part. Yes, L. Footplate. Here we go. There it is, just hold it in place with your finger. And there it is, soldered. You just need to repeat that for all the bits. I won't show you all of them. We'll just do the vacuum now. We'll do the vacuum. So the vacuum pipe is either one of these two. There are 4 of these, because if you have your locomotive push-pull fitted, they were fitted with vacuum push-pull, so you will need all 4 for push-pull, so we'll just cut them off. And it's already pre-shaped, so you don't need to worry too much about it. Just need to clean the bottom of it off. And that's okay. And we've got our 1.1mm drill somewhere. There it is. Let's use the other Dremel. So we'll do all the holes for this one, and it's the ones on the left. So you've got your holes 1.1, and they should be the right spacing apart, and yes they are. And then all you've got to do is just solder your vacuum pipe in place, and do that front and back. Just needs bending slightly. Do the front one first. So the front one's vertical, that's good. slightly different soldering technique this time because they don't go all the way through. So what we'll do is we'll make a solder amalgam by tinning with 145, and then we'll put a little bit more flux on again, and then we'll put the white metal solder on top. So we've got it the right way up, and now all we'll do is we'll flux around that and we'll solder it in place using indirect heat. So we will heat up the brass casting rather than the white metal. Just make our soldering iron a bit cleaner. That looks good. We'll just clean it up quickly. We'll use a stainless steel brush because that's good for removing solder. We're going to fit the steps next. And there are cast marks on the underside of the frame, footplate, for doing this. We're going to solder them in place. Just make sure you get them the correct way round. The single ones go at the front and the double ones are for the cab. So we'll just use a bit of flux here for this one. Make sure it's fully seated and vertical. So we'll move the solder so you can see. So we'll hold it in place so it's flat using a file. It's just solder, be gentle, solder them around, don't use a huge amount of white metal solder because the more you use the more you have to clean off afterwards. But make sure that the steps are seated right up against the footplate valance, and that way they should be vertical when they are fixed. Yes, well, make sure you seat them correctly. Try and get it right the first time, otherwise you'll be forever trying to line them up. And also remember, white metal, like other solder parts, does get hot. Yeah, well, I'm not having much luck with that. So we'll let it cool down a bit before it melts. So we've had a bit more luck with the rear one. So that one is in place. We can go back to doing the front one now. So we've had success this time. All you need to do, I mean, as long as you don't have the soldering iron too hot, you can adjust things as you require. The happy medium is actually getting the soldering iron to the correct temperature so that it doesn't melt what you're working on before you had a chance to actually fix it in place. So I've shown you all the bits. All the other bits are just duplicated, and with the lamp irons I am going to use super glue to fix those on. I'm not going to bother soldering them. So that's it. That's page 5 completed. A bit about DCC, and watch out for the next program, which will be coming soon, maybe this week, and I'll see you the next time.